caught in the crossfire. It's caught in the crossfire.
According to Reuters, Vladimir Putin said on Wednesday Russia will respond to any U.S. deployment of short or intermediate-range nuclear weapons in Europe by targeting not only the countries where they are stationed, but the United States itself. In his toughest remarks yet on a potential new arms race, Putin said Russia was not seeking confrontation and would not take the first step to deploy missiles in response to Washington's decision this month to quit a landmark Cold War
ecosystem. A major scientific review has now concluded that over 40% of species are in decline, while a third are at risk of extinction. Today's guest is Professor Dave Goulson from the University of Sussex in the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for being with us here on France 24.
Morning.
Good morning. First of all, could you talk us through some of these statistics? Just how bad has this situation got?
Yeah, there have been a number of scientific studies published in the last few years. Probably the best known came out in late 2017. It was a study from Germany of insect catches in traps called malaise traps, where scientists had found that the daily catch of insects in Germany fell by 75% over a 26-year period, which is, 3/4 of the insects of Germany have seemingly disappeared. And there have been other studies. There was one from Puerto Rico, various long-term monitoring studies across Europe of butterflies and moths, and they're all rather alarmingly showing the same trends of varying rates of either very rapid or quite rapid decline.
And presumably there are certain species that are being harder hit than others.
Yes, although actually, one thing that isn't really appreciated is just how many how many different types of insects there are, and for most of them we don't know much about what's happening. So insects make up about 2/3 of all life on Earth in terms of numbers of species that we know of. And most of them aren't actually monitored in any kind of detailed way. It would be an enormously kind of expensive job to do. But for some particular groups, we do have good data. And yeah, they're not all declining at equal rates. The data for moths, for example, suggests that in the UK, moths have declined by maybe 30% over the period that the German insects declined by 75%. But the patterns are broadly the same. They all kind of agree in the sense that certainly there is some kind of major problem as far as our insects are concerned.
According to Reuters, President Vladimir Putin has said that Russia is militarily ready for a Cuban Missile-style crisis if the United States is foolish enough to want one. He went on to say that his country currently has the edge when it comes to a first nuclear strike. The Cuban Missile Crisis erupted in 1962 when Moscow responded to a U.S. missile deployment in Turkey by sending ballistic missiles to Cuba, sparking a standoff that brought the world to the brink of nuclear war. More than 5 decades on, tensions are rising again over Russian fears that the United States might deploy intermediate-range nuclear missiles in Europe as a landmark Cold War-era arms control treaty unravels.
Russia's defense ministry has released the first video showing an underwater test of its Poseidon nuclear-powered drone. The clip, released on Wednesday, came shortly after President Vladimir Putin's State of the Nation address. Putin said the tests of the Poseidon have been conducted successfully and the first submarine equipped to carry it will be commissioned later this year. He first mentioned the weapon early last year, saying it cannot be intercepted and can carry a nuclear warhead to target aircraft carrier groups or coastal areas. Also in Wednesday's speech, Putin said he hopes to mend ties with the US and remains open for arms control talks with Washington.
That major winter storm is causing hundreds of accidents across the Midwest and the Northeast. The heavy snow even collapsing a school's roof. Let's go to Ginger for the very latest. Good morning, Ginger.
Morning, Michael. By the time it got up to Massachusetts, it was just a couple of inches that caused more of that irritation, lots of those regular accidents. St. Cloud, Minnesota, now it's snowiest February on record. It's making history from there through Wisconsin.
Another wintry
Icy mess, making for a travel nightmare. More than 4,500 flights canceled or delayed. Cars skating off the roads across the Midwest. In Minnesota, at least 208 accidents. The airport on a ground stop for hours. 6 to 11 inches of snow left roads lined with wrecks. The Twin Cities now marking its snowiest February on record. In Nebraska, 9 semi-trucks colliding, backing up traffic for hours. In Waterloo, Iowa, a school roof collapsing under the heavy snow. No one was injured. Heavy-duty snowplows swarming runways overnight at Pittsburgh International. Thunder snow captured on transportation cameras in Ohio. And in a new storm attacking the desert Southwest, Las Vegas, Nevada, with a ½ inch of snow, the first measurable snow in more than a decade. And now with that new storm, Southern California schools are closed where there's any elevation because you're getting snow. And you're going to keep getting it through today, tomorrow, and then it's going to be moving to the east. Check out that low pressure system. As it slides east, you see north of Phoenix, so Flagstaff, any of the areas there on the rim could get up to 2 to even 3 feet of snow. And then by Saturday, it's going to mean damaging wind possibilities from Kentucky back to Arkansas, guys.
Some wild weather out there.
Steve
All right,
Ginger, is in
thanks.
Nashville, Tennessee. And Steve, Nashville's been getting drenched by rain all month long.
That's right, George. By the time this is all over, Nashville could have its wettest February on record. Across the South today, up to 3 inches of rain could fall in certain places. Flash flood and river flood warnings are up across several states. But I want you to take a good look at this. This is a live picture of Reagan National Airport, which is leading the way in flight cancellations this morning. Reagan and Baltimore, a third of all flights at those airports are canceled. More than 1,000 flights are canceled across the country. The airlines are offering travel waivers for people who can't travel today. Here in the South, this rain is expected to continue through the weekend as another storm system moves in.
Reuters reports Iranian President Hassan Rouhani said on Wednesday relations with the United States had rarely been so bad that the sanctions imposed by the Trump administration targeting Tehran's oil and banking sectors amounted to a terrorist act. Animosity between Washington and Tehran, bitter foes since Iran's 1979 revolution, has intensified since U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from an international nuclear deal with Tehran last May. Trump also reimposed sanctions lifted under the accord. Rouhani said, "The struggle between Iran and America is currently at a maximum. America has employed all of its power against us."
Discovered in a village close to Strasbourg, and it comes ahead of planned demonstrations in Paris against a rising number of attacks on France's Jewish community. President Macron has condemned anti-Semitic abuse after a prominent intellectual was targeted over the weekend. Natasha Butler reports now from the French capital.
It's the latest attack against Jewish people in France. On Saturday in Paris, French philosopher Alain Finkielkraut was insulted for being Jewish during a yellow vest protest. Reacting to the attack, the French president wrote on Twitter, "The anti-Semitic insults he has been subjected to are the absolute negation of what we are and what makes us a great nation. We will not tolerate it." Last week, a memorial tree to a young Jewish man who was tortured to death in 2006 was vandalized near Paris. While in the city, the German word for Jews was sprayed across a popular bagel shop. And a portrait was defaced of one of France's most famous women, Holocaust survivor and feminist minister Simone Veil.
The graffiti on these letterboxes may have been erased, but the French government is struggling to make anti-Jewish sentiment disappear across the country. In fact, the French Interior Minister has called it a poison spreading across the country because over the past year, attacks against Jewish people have risen by more than 70%.
Some people say that the Yellow Vest movement is being used as a platform by some protesters to express anti-Jewish ideas. But the head of France's Jewish Students' Union says the recent attacks are a reflection of what he describes as an increasingly intolerant society.
We can clearly see the level of violence in society, this anti-Semitism which takes many forms, from Islamist movements, the extreme right and the ultra-left. We also see an extremely high level of homophobia, xenophobia and racism against migrants.
For Daniel Knoll, the events of the past week have evoked painful memories. His 85-year-old mother was murdered in her home less than a year ago. Police said she was targeted because she was Jewish.
I think that France has fallen very low. These people are fools, uneducated, and they have no place amongst the yellow vests.
During the Second World War, France's government collaborated with Germany's Nazi regime and deported tens of thousands of Jewish people. Today, France is home to the biggest Jewish community in Europe, but for some, the shadow, the past, is never far away. Natasha Butler, Al Jazeera, Paris.
According to CNN, an LGBT group has cut ties with tennis great Martina Navratilova after she said it was a form of cheating for transgender women to be allowed to compete in women's sport. New York-based Athlete Ally, which supports LGBT sportspeople, called the comments transphobic and removed the 18-time Grand Slam winner from its advisory board and as an ambassador. Navratilova wrote in the Sunday Times that it was insane that transgender athletes who decide to become female had achieved honors that were beyond their capabilities
South
as
Korea
men.
is once again plagued by fine dust. Several cities and provinces will be under emergency measures on Friday to help get rid of the pollution. Those will affect Seoul, the surrounding province of Gyeonggi-do, and the city of Incheon. Also, the provinces of Jeollabuk-do, Gangwon-do, Gyeongsangbuk-do, and the cities of Daejeon and Ulsan. These measures ban the driving of old diesel vehicles over 2.5 tons from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. Government employees will have to leave their cars at home if their license plate ends with an odd number. Also, people are urged to stay indoors and wear a mask with a filter if heading outside.
For the past 3 decades, the Catholic Church has been rocked by a growing series of sex abuse scandals. In the United States, over 100,000 children are thought to have been abused by priests since the 1950s. And in Ireland, the Church was found guilty of covering up clerical child abuse on a large scale, with some 14,500 cases reported there between 1930 and 1990. In Australia, a commission found that 7% of priests were known child abusers and that some 4,500 children had been sexually abused since the 1950s. And in Germany, a study found that over 3,600 minors were sexually assaulted by members of the clergy in the past 70 years. Faced with a growing list of scandals, the Vatican has often been accused of protecting itself rather than the victims, and in some cases, of covering up the incidents. In 2010, Pope Benedict became the first head of the clergy to publicly acknowledge the issue, and in 2014, Pope Francis set up the first commission for the protection of minors within the Church. In August 2018, he became the first pope to ask the victims for forgiveness.
We apologize for the abuses of power, of conscience, for the sexual abuses perpetrated by members of the clergy.
As thousands of victims continue to come forward, the Vatican is now calling for an end to the culture of denial surrounding sexual abuse of minors in the Catholic Church.
Russian military patrols secure what are described as 2 humanitarian corridors, which Moscow says will allow people, mainly women and children living in the Al-Rukban refugee camp, to leave. The Russians, in coordination with the Syrian government, say a 55-kilometer area has been secured for 24 hours. The clock started ticking at 9 o'clock Tuesday morning. So far, no one from the camp has used the corridor, and the Russians blame the Free Syrian Army, which are backed by the United States and which has control of the camp.
Under these circumstances, the Syrian government, with assistance from Russia, made the unprecedented decision to open 2 humanitarian corridors to ensure the exit of internally displaced people from this camp to chosen places of residence.
It's unclear whether the Russians and the Syrians set up the humanitarian corridors after negotiations with the Free Syrian Army to allow people from out of the camp walking the few kilometers to where the humanitarian corridors actually start, or whether they simply just set up the humanitarian corridors on their own. Now, the situation within the camp itself is incredibly dire. They were only able to get a first shipment, the first in a few months, of aid to the camp a few days ago, and many women women and children who are the main residents of that camp are absolutely desperate. Meanwhile, in southeastern Syria, fighting continues in the last ISIL-held village of Al-Baghuz. The Syrian Democratic Forces, the Kurdish-led troops backed by the US, have surrounded the village, most of which has been reduced to rubble. Inside, around 200 villagers are being held hostage by ISIL in tents.
Many of them are apparently being actively prevented from leaving by ISIL and continue to be subjected to intensified air and ground-based strikes by the US-led coalition forces and their SDF allies on the ground. As the High Commissioner puts it, and I quote, "Civilians continue to be used as pawns by the various parties," and she calls on them to provide safe passage to those who wish to flee, while those who wish to remain must also be protected as much as possible.
ISIL fighters, according to the SDF, have dug tunnels beneath the village and are hiding there, slowing the fight down and stopping the SDF from declaring the end of ISIL's enclave in Syria. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, Gaziantep.
It's named Salvator Mundi, a painting by Leonardo da Vinci depicting Jesus Christ. Thought to be 500 years old, it's said to be one of the world's last long-lost Da Vinci originals.
Give me one thought.
That's why when it was auctioned in 2017, the bidding was unlike anything ever seen before in the art world.
200 million. Are we all done? 300 million at $370 million. It's $400 million. Is the bid. Sold.
Including the buyer's premium, Salvator Mundi sold for a record-breaking $450 million. That's more than 4 times what anybody in the art world predicted.
The identity of the buyer, initially shrouded in secrecy, was eventually revealed to be a wealthy Saudi working on behalf of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who then gave the painting to the Louvre Abu Dhabi Museum as a gift. But the announced unveiling of the artwork was abruptly canceled without explanation. Salvator Mundi has not been seen since, leading Pulitzer Prize-winning art critic Jerry Saltz to say it was all a fraud.
If you bought the most famous painting in the entire world by the most famous artist who ever lived at the highest price ever paid, why are you hiding it? Might the painting be a fake? You don't have the confidence to show the most famous new painting in the world? Something's fishy here.
But Oxford professor Martin Kemp, one of the world's renowned experts on Da Vinci, thinks the painting is authentic, but with every day it's kept hidden with no information, he worries.
It